There we go. We'd like to welcome you to our first lecture of this year, and we have many more to come. We've got an ever-growing program, so if you're keen to hear more about our upcoming lectures and workshops, please subscribe to our newsletter, and Amy is going to share that in the chat for you just now. Pathways is a volunteer-led organisation with a number of educational programmes. We have peer support as well, and we advocate on behalf of our families. Pathways brings together the power of compassionate people to create lasting change through all of our programmes. These programmes are all offered free of charge for our families and our community, such as our lecture this evening. So if you are able, please consider making a donation to Pathways to help us continue to make a positive impact in our community. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Todd Woodward from UBC. Todd is a researcher and director of the Cognitive Neuroscience of Schizophrenia lab in the Department of Psychiatry at UBC. So welcome, and thank you so much, Todd, for joining us this evening and supporting Pathways in our community.
Thank you, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank everybody for being here on this beautiful evening to listen to this lecture, and it's a real pleasure to be able to contribute to the great work that Pathways does. So I'm going to start, basically I'll be talking about different types of treatment for schizophrenia and the different brain networks that are involved in that. I'm going to start with a slide that looks complicated, but just bear with me. And now I just have to wait for my slide to advance. So many of you probably have heard about the genetic contribution to schizophrenia, and of course genes are the templates that are used to produce proteins and lipids. Lipids and proteins produce neurotransmitters, which are the chemicals that go throughout the brain in order to make us do everything, to feel everything, to think everything, and make the brain essentially work. And so I don't actually work at any of those levels, so I won't be talking about that. But what I just want to sort of emphasize is that there are 3 other levels which I do work at. So these neurotransmitters, these proteins and lipids all produce the brain as we know it, but neuroanatomy is a slightly higher level. So the brain as a whole, different areas will activate when people do different things. So those aren't essentially, they're not following the neurotransmitter patterns, but they're creating an anatomical pattern that we can see with brain imaging. But the interesting thing about brain networks is that each one of them has a function, and cognitive function is the domain of psychology. So what type of thinking does that brain network carry out? And those thought processes and all the different cognitive operations that the brain carries out result in types of behavior. So notice that there are 2 types of behavior I have listed here. Here I have functional outcome, and here I have symptoms like hallucinations and delusions. And what I want to emphasize here is just that delusions and hallucinations, for example, which are 2 of the primary symptoms of schizophrenia, hallucinations involve hearing voices or other sounds when there's actually nobody there, or they're just not an actual perception, but they are, no external stimulation, but people actually do still perceive voices. Or delusions are fixed false beliefs. So beliefs that the CIA is after somebody, or beliefs that, a person is somehow related to a famous person. And those types of symptoms change with time. So sometimes people will be hallucinating and it'll be bothering them a lot, sometimes not at all. Other times the delusions will be strong, or they'll change, or they'll just disappear. So this is called state. So this whole sort of line of everything from genes to proteins to neurotransmitters are changing with time. They just come and go. But there's other aspects of schizophrenia that stay stable. Like poor functional outcome is generally quite a stable sort of issue that people with schizophrenia have. So those are trait aspects. Also, hopefully the diagnosis of schizophrenia that stays stable as well. And then underneath the related to functional outcome is cognitive thinking and properties of the brain that do things like pay attention, remember things, try to organize your life, and those are related to functional outcome. But memory, attention, executive function impairments actually aren't related to delusions and hallucinations. There are different aspects of thinking that relate to delusions and hallucinations. So I'll be talking a lot about the trait aspects of the illness, things that stay stable, and the state aspects, things that change with time. And so there is the level of behavior, the actual symptom, or the daily living that people experience, the thought processes that underlie those types of behaviors. And then I'll talk just a little about the neuroanatomy that underlies each different stream here. So here are actually 4 different types of treatments that can help people with schizophrenia. The most familiar one is medication. And notice that medication actually affects this stream. It affects the state stream. So things that change with time can be affected by medication. And medication impacts the level of neurotransmitters, so brain chemistry. And by impacting the neurotransmitters, it will impact brain networks and will impact thought processes, and hopefully will be able to impact symptoms as well. But that's really not the only option we have for treatment of schizophrenia. There's also cognitive behavioral therapy as one example. And cognitive behavioral therapy, notice, doesn't try to impact neurotransmitters, but actually directly tries to impact a cognitive process, thought processes. And the type of thought process that you will be impact cognitive behavioral therapy is, let's talk about your belief that people have trouble with. So if you believe that the CIA is spying on you, so you talk about what is the evidence for that belief, what might be the evidence against it, does that seem like a likely scenario? So you'll address the person's specific beliefs and try to walk them through a process of how much information do you need to believe that? What type of information would be important to undo that belief? And is that possible? So that's sort of one-to-one discussion about the person's belief and talking about how you can impact the thought processes. And if you can change the thought process, then you should be able to change the severity of the symptom. Metacognitive training is a method that we've developed, that we've introduced to the literature, and is now been translated into 37 languages and is used internationally. And it's also impacting the level of thoughts. But it's different than cognitive behavioral therapy in the sense that it comes from a history of research where we identify the type of thought processes that are involved in delusions, but then we make people aware of what those thought processes are in everybody. So it's not talking to people about their specific delusion, but talking about how people think. So we all jump to conclusions sometimes. We all avoid integrating disconfirming evidence at times as well. And so we just walk people slowly through examples that show what type of biased information, processing of information we all have, and how that can also manifest as symptoms of psychosis. So there's 3 different options here that are available to help people with the changing aspects of the illness. And there's even one that impacts the non-changing aspects of the illness. I mean, non-changing is in the sense that they're not cyclical, but it can change through cognitive remediation or sort of brain training type of treatment. So there's memory, attention, these executive function impairments can actually be changed slowly by just working out the brain through what's called cognitive remediation, and going through puzzles and keeping your brain active in a way that you can actually also help people with functional outcome and daily activities. So we have 3 different treatments for the state changes and one also for the trait changes. And so I'm just going to walk slowly through some examples of these types of treatments. So first I'll talk about cognitive remediation. So we're targeting, again, a thought process. We're not targeting a neurotransmitter. We're not targeting any protein liquid, but a type of thought process. And like I already mentioned, cognitive behavior being MCT. And before I start, I just want to mention the funding sources for this work, which is actually a 20-year period of work starting even before 2000, when the Norma Calder Foundation, which eventually evolved into the Mind Foundation and then the BC Schizophrenia Society, actually funded my first postdoc, right, probably even before year 2000. And then these organizations have been consistently funding this research. And if it wasn't for them, I would never have been able to create what we have today, which is now funded, was funded, and we're working to get funding again from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, which is the national level funding organizations, competitive funding. Michael Smith Foundation, local. NARSAT is an American organization. But also we have funding from sources that actually are not about clinical work, but it's very, very important to understand healthy cognition and healthy brain before we can really understand when there's dysfunction that leads to mental health issues. So there's been a long period of research that has gone into this work. And this drawing here by Daniel Newbury is from Riverview Hospital, and that's where most of this initial work was done that I'll talk about today. For a long period of time, I think when Riverview shut down in 2007, we actually moved off that campus and up to Women's and Children's, just because that's also owned by the PHSA. So that's where our lab is now, and the BC MARI, BT Mental Health and Addictions Research Institute. And so over the past 5 years, and this is now a completed study, we've been looking at metacognitive training, cognitive remediation, and treatment as usual. So we've randomly recruited people to be involved in this research and randomly assigned them to one of these treatment groups. And so we've been actually, through the research funding that I mentioned earlier, we've been providing psychological services to the Vancouver mental health teams for the past 5 years. And so that's been a great benefit for them. And people could, if they were assigned to the metacognitive training group, they could switch to cognitive remediation afterwards. And so everyone was able to have all three of these treatments. And the goal of this work was to look at the brain changes that happen through metacognitive training and cognitive remediation. And the impact of that type of work I'll talk about later. But metacognitive training targets cognitive biases, and through that tries to target delusions. And cognitive remediation, like I mentioned before, targets attention, memory, and that type of those type of thought processes. So obviously, if you impact delusions, that wouldn't be related to impact of cognitive deficits, and neurocognitive deficits also wouldn't be related to impact of delusion. So there's different brain networks that underlie both of these. And like I mentioned, cognitive remediation is a more stable trait, and delusions and hallucinations, thought disorder, negative symptoms are a more changing state type of process. So I just also want to mention Mahesh Menon, I think, has addressed your group before, and we've been working closely on this for 20 years, along with Stefan Moritz, who was the primary developer of metacognitive training in Hamburg. And Stefan, actually, we just submitted a paper that sort of describes the history of metacognitive training, and all is based around Vancouver, because Stefan Moritz came to Vancouver for a period, I think around 2001, 2002, when we did a lot of work at Riverview Hospital, looking at the thinking patterns underlying delusions. And then we translated all of that knowledge into the metacognitive training program to teach people what the thinking patterns are, not about their own delusion, but about all people. And then you start to understand that if we can question all thoughts, if everyone needs to question thoughts, then maybe the person can gain insight that they should question their own thoughts, and maybe their delusions are not necessarily 100% certain like they thought. And so Hesh has also worked a long period of time with Stefan and I. So this sort of the final completion of this project was based on that type of collaboration. So, okay, so here's the treatment model again. I've already mentioned. So, before doing this research project, primarily the treatment for people in Vancouver was medication. And then we started to add in cognitive remediation and metacognitive training so that people could actually get a much fuller range of treatment when there wasn't psychology services already available, which is the case when the mental health teams of Vancouver. And through that, I'll just show you a little bit about what cognitive remediation is about. So cognitive remediation uses paper and pencil tasks or computerized software to allow training of multiple cognitive domains. So cognitive remediation in our study was Scientific Brain Training Pro. And that has been used in individual and group settings in psychiatric facilities and practices worldwide. So participants carry out individualized training on personal tablets and discuss real-life applications. And the difficulty level is adapted based on the participant's performance, so that if a person's having trouble with a certain level, it can be dialed down to meet that person's level, and then the training starts from there. For example, here's an example intervention. And so the whole process could involve 2 sessions per week for 4 weeks, so that would end up being 8 sessions on computer tablets. And between sessions, there's homework and practice to master the material. So we train attention, processing speed, working memory, verbal memory, planning, and reasoning. So just so that the whole thing's clear, and actually I'm going to open my window. So excuse me a sec.
Whilst Todd's pausing, I just wanted to welcome everyone to send in their questions via the chat function, which is just at the bottom. So the chat, you hit the chat and you can send in your questions to Todd and we'll present them to him either through the lecture or at the end, depending on whether they're relevant or not. Okay.
Sorry about that. It's just, I'm in Lions Bay and the sun's just coming to the windows now, it gets hot. Okay, and so I also want to mention that the study that we did is not to see whether or not cognitive remediation and metacognitive training work, because we know they do. That's been studied in dozens of studies, including meta-analyses, which have shown time and time again that these methods are effective. But what we wanted to do is test the brain activity changes. So we actually don't have the results, so I won't be telling you what the results are yet, because we've just received funding again from the BC Schizophrenia Society to finish up the analyses of the data, because of course of COVID, we couldn't continue with the data collection. And also it took so much resources to move everybody from UBC and Women's and Children's to remote sites that we just couldn't actually get those data analyzed. So I'm just going to describe to you these different treatments. And so here's an example of attention. So in this one, you have to identify the odd stimulus. So you can see that there's a circle, or a white filled star, and then black everywhere else. So you have to identify that, and you go through and do those types of tasks. And then this is a memory task. So people have to remember these words on the list, and then they get a lot of practice doing that to try to sharpen their cognitive skills. And it has different recognition and recall. And then there's these types of tasks, reasoning tasks. So we look here and see the solution, and there's a purple, a green ring, a tan ring, and a blue ring. So how do we move these and make them stack like that? So you'd have to move these, presumably over to here, then move the blue one over to there, then move all three of those over to there. So there's practice on doing things like that. And then it's not only involving doing those tasks, but it's also talking about why we're doing this and why it's important. And it's based on research. People with mental illness, particularly psychosis, tend to have difficulty processing information quickly, focusing or concentrating, difficulty switching from one task to the other. And so that helps people understand why they're doing that. And in the meta-analyses and the summaries, this is actually a very important part of cognitive remediation therapy. So it is actually trying to target these thought processes that will help people with their day-to-day life. But just by doing this, you're also changing your brain. You don't change your behavior without changing your brain. And with cognitive remediation, the goal is to make changes that will last longer than just a session, obviously. And so that involves changing brain networks. So why does this work? So I'll just quickly show you some research that we published 10 years ago now. This is a working memory task, and the task is to remember these letters. So either 2, 4, 6, or 8 letters is presented. So say you try to remember 8 letters, you have 4 seconds to remember all those letters, then a 6-second delay, then you see this one letter and you just say yes or no, was that presented here? So that's working memory, the ability to keep a little bit of information in your mind for a short period of time. And that might be confusing, but either you saw 8 or 6 or 4 or 2, not all of them at the same time. So obviously it's harder to remember 8 than it is to remember 2. So that's what we call a variable working memory load. Harder and harder the more letters there are. And the results, which were published in 2011, showed these brain networks are involved, and others were involved as well. And I won't talk in a lot of detail about brain networks. This is my other big topic that I love to talk about, as everybody who knows me around me knows. But what we found here is that here's the people without schizophrenia, and 2 letters is red, 4 letters is, now it's hard to explain a bit, but what fMRI measures, functional magnetic resonance imaging, is actually oxygenated blood flow. So when neurons fire and your certain parts of the brain have to work, then the blood flows to those areas because they need oxygen. So what I'm actually measuring here is the increase and decrease back to baseline of blood flow. I don't know if you can see it, but this is about 24, 25 seconds. So even though people only had to encode for 4 seconds, remember for 4 seconds, we had to watch the blood flow for 25 seconds because it's very slow. And so when there are 2 letters, this is the activation. 4 letters, 6 letters, 8 letters, you get increased activity as 2, 4, 6, and 8 letters are viewed. But the people with schizophrenia actually had higher activity at 2 letters even, and a little bit more at 4. At 6 letters, they activated almost as much as at 8 letters for the healthy controls, and then really didn't activate much more at 8 letters. So what I'm trying to say by showing you this is that the exact same brain networks are involved in people with schizophrenia and healthy controls. There's not any damage anywhere. Everything's working. It's just that they have to work harder to achieve the same level of performance. And when you start to see impairment is when you put the level of difficulty at a higher level than their brain can handle at that time, which is a lot lower. So this is 6 letters, they're getting to their maximum, whereas healthy people that are the comparison group are nowhere near their maximum at 6 letters. So the good news about this is that because there's no damage and because the network is intact, it's just inefficiency. So that's why cognitive remediation can work, because when the brain has practiced with cognitive operations over and over, it can become more efficient and it can start to change the difference between these 2 plots. So that's sort of the end of my discussions about cognitive remediation. So I want to move on to metacognitive training, which metacognitive training works in combination with medication. And I will talk about delusions because delusions are the focus of metacognitive training. And it impacts thought processes that underlie delusions. This is not memory, it's not attention. In fact, when we started 20 years ago, nobody knew what these thought processes were. And when Stefan came to Vancouver and Mahesh came to Vancouver, we worked very hard on that with not really that many other labs around the world, and started to identify what these thought processes were that were underlying delusions. And metacognitive training was the process of, once we'd identified what these thought patterns are, we actually put them all into PowerPoint presentations and then walked people slowly through these thought processes and had them experience them themselves. Because when you say to someone, oh, it's your delusions we're concerned about, or let's work on your delusions, that doesn't really mean anything. But when we say, sometimes we believe something's true when actually when we gather more information, it turns out not to be. That's a lot easier to understand because we all experience that. Sometimes we jump to conclusions, we decide something's the truth too quickly, and we should be gathering more information. And that's just an easier thing for people to understand. And as they can understand that more and more in their daily life, they can start to apply that to the thought processes that other people are telling them that's just not true. So here is Stefan's website. So this is actually in Germany. Stefan Moritz holds all the metacognitive training materials. It's been translated into 37 languages, as you can see here, and has 8 core modules. And so, you know, when people run through these modules, they can do them in any order. One doesn't really build on the other one. So I'll just show you some examples from these modules. So this is a knowledge translation approach, as I've already tried to mention. So it's a group-based program, it's interactive, has 8 core modules, and there's 2 versions, a version A and a version B. So you can run through in 4 weeks, twice a week, you can run through A, then you could do it again, but with a different version with different material by the same modules. And as I've been mentioning, some of the material was originally designed by various researchers in the field of cognitive neuropsychiatry, which is the study of thought processes that the psychological thought processes that underlie psychiatric symptoms. So in this case, the symptom is delusions associated with psychosis. And like I've been mentioning, this presented so that people can experience the biases, and then we always discuss, like we did with cognitive remediation, how this relates to everyday life in psychosis. It's also designed to be non-confrontational, which is always the problem with cognitive behavioral therapy, that often people don't really want to talk that much about their delusions, and they certainly not very interested in talking about why they might not be true. So we're not actually confronting a person's beliefs or their own experience at all. We're going through in a neutral way. So we avoid discussion of delusions. Instead, we're discussing psychosis in general terms. and it's a fun sort of, it's not, it's supposed to be a fun process. I mean, cognitive remediation is effective, but it's fun might sort of start to diminish after sort of 15 minutes of doing those puzzles. This isn't sort of drilling people with, you know, tasks they have to do, but it's just having discussion. And we have application to daily life, and we avoid those drill and practice type of routines. And so the format of all of the modules to introduce the cognitive biases for that session. And it's important to understand the research behind these biases if you're actually running the sessions. Work through examples, give a summary, how it's relevant to daily life, and how it's relevant to psychosis. And homework is also available for metacognitive training. So if there's an appropriate question, Emma, it might be a good time. Or should we wait till after?
Yeah, there are a few questions actually. The most recent, well, there's been a few about, are there any options to do this group-based program in Vancouver or anywhere in the Lower Mainline sometime soon?
Yeah, actually there is. I'm so happy to finally be able to say that there is. Usually the situation is that if the care team that a person is under is not using metacognitive training, there just is no other way. But now there is a way. I'll just flip forward to that now. Well, actually, I'll end up going through a lot of different slides here. But let's see, here it is. So there are groups available over Zoom this spring and summer. And there'll be 1 hour sessions 2 days a week, for example. This is just some examples. Rolling intake, groups of 4 to 6 participants delivered via Zoom, and the payment is donation to our research lab. So we can continue to develop this type of material. It's facilitated by Kirsten Reed, and you can contact her at this email address, kirstenreedcounseling@gmail.com, or you can call this number, which is our lab, the CNoS lab at UBC, and leave your email address, and Kirsten will email you and be able to organize some groups as soon as possible. So I will get back to the slide again. So don't worry if you didn't get it the first time, but I should stick to this full introduction to metacognitive training. Great question, by the way. So let me just show you some examples of what this involves. So this is a module called Jumping to Conclusions, which is a major part of metacognitive training. And this is based on our research and others. Many people with psychosis make decisions on the basis of little evidence. So little information. It's not, you know, to do with a person's delusion. If the person believes that the CIA is spying on them, I'm not talking about asking them that. I'm talking about asking them, you know, here's a fish that's black. Here's a lake with, you know, 50% or 60% black fish and 40% white. Do you think it came from that lake? And they'll say yes. So making quick decisions in material that's neutral to the actual person's belief system, but the brains of people that are currently experiencing delusions just make decisions with little information. But when they're well, that goes away to some extent. And so there's this ebb and flow of this state, these states of being ill and experiencing delusions and not experiencing delusion. The brain changes, and you can measure those brain changes by cognitive processes. This type of decision making can easily lead to errors, so it's better to use a style that involves careful consideration. The perception of reality for many people with psychosis is altered, unlike interpretations that other people might disregard. So that's how we introduce it. Not talking to the person about their delusion, talking just about the way people are, and also what research has found about psychosis in general. So we look at these exercises, showing different paintings, try to identify the correct title for each painting. These are actual paintings from European museums, lesser known ones. Discuss the pros and cons of each interpretation, state your degree of confidence, very important. That's what we're working on, to reduce the confidence in deciding quickly. Pay special attention to features that rule out one interpretation. So here's a painting. So the group will see this, and then there'll be a discussion about what's the actual title of this painting. Is we'll start by talking about the expression of the man, expression of the woman, right? So, you know, someone will notice the man looks a bit like, you know, his face is down a bit. He's not energetic. He's not leaning in. He's not aggressive. He looks like he's, you know, maybe wondering what the woman's thinking, right? Or just thinking, I need to hear from her. I need to know what she wants to do. He's got a flower. She's looking like, not really sure, trying to decide. Is this been a confession of adultery? Is this courtship? Announcement of a relative's death? Or is, I can't see the bottom one because of the Zoom screen. Or is he selling flowers? So there'd be a discussion about that. And then everyone would kind of talk about what they think is important, and then the true title. So what the artist actually was trying to depict here is shown. And then we talk about how, you know, some people are, you know, sure that it's one way and not the other way. And then, well, it was courtship. Why isn't it confession of adultery? Well, you know, the lady doesn't look upset. She doesn't look like someone's just told her something, you know, that's devastating. She looks more like she's thinking about what to do. Although somebody did say, well, what if she's also been adulterous? Maybe she's thinking, should I say so? Yeah, that's kind of a joke that I was thinking of. But so anyway, that's what the group ends up discussing. And then this is a similar thing, jumping to conclusions, but now we show, this is very similar to what I already said. We need to find a happy medium between making a hasty decision and being overly accurate. So do we risk making a poor decision to be fast, or do we take more time, possibly be more accurate, but sometimes that takes too much time. So we talk about the benefits, costs and benefits of making these types of judgments. And the following, you will see a series of pictures that starts with only one detail, another detail is added. This continues until the whole picture is revealed. Your task is to identify the object, discuss evidence for and against each alternative. So we start with this, okay? Is this a smiling face, a bowl, a boat, a sled, a rocking chair, or an elephant's head? So you can see how, you know, any of these would fit right now. This could be part of a smile. This could be part of a bowl, a boat, an elephant. This could be the tusk, a rocking chair, it could be a sled. So people will talk about, and some people will be very confident they already know what that is, even with that small picture. But so then one of the things we talk about is how confident can you really be that that is an elephant's head at this point? And if people are sort of, you know, what we're working on is that you just can't know yet. You can't really be sure. Do you want to make a decision yet? And we are training people through, you know, repetition of this process to just hold back on firm decisions. So then we have this. How does the elephant head look now? Still looks pretty good. Rocking chair, good. Sled, good. Boat, maybe not so much. Smiling face, definitely not. So we slowly show more and more pieces. And so now, you know, people are going to have to be able to start to say, wow, I really thought that was an elephant's head, but now it looks like it's probably a rocking chair. You know, people that thought it was a sled, while they still have a point, I guess you could take it down at, you know, Snow Mountain. But in the end, you'll have to admit that if you thought that was an elephant's head confidently, then hopefully this type of experience will show you that sometimes it's important to change your mind. And then we have empathy. Okay, another research has shown that people with schizophrenia aren't as accurate when they're trying to use theory of mind, which is your ability to recognize what's on someone else's mind. Or sorry, that's actually the wrong title. So I guess I'm missing the part. That is part of it, but I don't think I have any slides for that. But then what we do is show social scenarios and say, what do you think's happening for this person? And then, you know, what's on that person's mind, they might not realize the full information, which is theory of mind, knowing that what's on that person's mind is actually only a partial truth, because what the whole situation is, it's like the Three's Company thing, right? I don't know how old everyone is, or if you watch Three's Company, but you know, Mr. Roper never knew what was going on. He'd come in and he'd see the scene one way, but we all knew from watching Jack and Chrissy and Janet that the whole situation was different. So theory of mind is recognizing that Mr. Roper sees things differently than we do, right? So that we have units to work on that, but I don't actually have that here, I don't think. And then there's memory. So our research and other labs have shown that people with schizophrenia have impaired memory. It's actually reduced a little bit, but they have they're overconfident. So when they make an error, they think they're right more confidently than the healthy control group. So we have, no, I have the wrong one there again. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a second. These are just mixed up a bit. So empathy, let's talk about that. Okay, what's on this person's mind? What's on this person's mind? Can we tell? And another effect is there's an impairment in seeing the expression, in knowing what's on someone's mind just by looking at the expression. So compared to people without schizophrenia, there's an effect where it's more difficult to say, you know, what someone's emotion actually is inside their mind by looking at the facial expression. So we have these cutouts like this, and we say, okay, what about this guy? Is he enjoying a rock festival? Is he shouting something? Is he calling for help? Or is he angry? And it's very difficult to tell by looking at his facial expression what it is. So the group will again discuss what it might be. He looks angry because he's very muddy and that must be uncomfortable. It's probably not a flood disaster. He doesn't look like he's shouting at anybody. And a rock festival, why is he so muddy? So some people might take that perspective. And then eventually they'll see that he is at a rock festival and they just got very muddy and they're yelling. And that's a joyful expression. Or how about this man? Is he running a marathon? Is he angry? Is he shouting for help? Or is he worshiping the sun? Just, out there getting a suntan. Again, everyone makes that type of discussion. See the full picture. He's actually angry. He's drinking. And his facial expression, if you thought it was one way, actually this could be another way. So that's the jumping to conclusions type of, and the whole process of metacognitive training ties into jumping to conclusions. So how much evidence do we need to decide quickly for emotions, for social situations? Just looking at drawings, paintings, all those things ties into jumping to conclusions, but also integrating evidence that disconfirms a belief. And so a memory module, as I mentioned before, there's an impairment in memory, but there's overconfidence in memories. Overconfidence for false memories. So if there's an error in memory, you remember something happened when it actually didn't, or if you've forgotten something, people with psychosis are more confident that they're accurate when actually they're not. And it's important to recognize that we don't remember that accurately. It's not like a video recorder, it's a constructive process where we have to try to reconstruct what we experience. I'll just skip that. So we look at these complex scenes and then we ask people to recall what they saw in the picture. So I can't do this over Zoom, I don't think, but so we look at that picture and then we try to have, say, about 20 seconds to remember everything we can see in that picture. So I'm going to show you some words and you tell me whether or not you saw them in those pictures afterwards. So take a look at that. And just, you can put up your hand at home, I guess. Did you see a beach umbrella? Did you see a lifeguard? Did you see a dog? Did you see a ball? How about a life belt, a life vest, or a lifesaver probably? Water, hat, towel, right? So you go through those, the group kind of puts up their hand and says which ones they remember. Then it turns out that actually, if you said ball or towel, they weren't presented. And what happens is when you have a very strong kind of scenario with a theme that's strong, like the beach, then people will remember that there's a ball or remember there's a towel when actually they were never presented. So the process is to show people in the group that our memories are not perfect and that we have to learn to doubt our memory sometimes. And if someone tells us that never happened, we have to learn to kind of accept that maybe that's the case. And it's the same thing here. This is a scenario for a playground. And so then again, we say, what did you, and then you can make the effect even stronger by suggesting for people to say what they think they would see in a playground. So the group will say, oh, I'd see sand, I'd see a shovel, I'd see a slide, I'd see, and they actually list through things. You can actually start to produce what's called a false memory for what was in the scene by having people do that. Then we ask them to say what they saw, and some of those things were never presented. So this is just the material for the memory module. And again, our memories play tricks on us. If there's arguments, eyewitness testimony, keep in mind you cannot remember vivid details necessarily. Don't be too sure. Seek additional information. Don't jump to conclusions, and be willing to integrate disconfirming evidence. Same type of thing. Changing beliefs. So this is a module on its own, not about jumping to conclusions, but about integrating disconfirming evidence against a belief. So these pictures illustrate a scenario, and then we're going to show you in reverse order, and we talk about the possibility of some interpretations of these events. So here's the group would discuss this picture, a picture of a man with a shark on the front of a board, like a shark head anyway, and he's on a beach. So is he a shark hunter? Is he doing research on sharks? Is he testing his new shark-style surfboard, or is he scared everyone away with the fake shark head? So people talk about what they think the scenario is. So it looks like he's got a new surfboard and that it has a shark head on it. That sounds cool. It looks like he's surfing, although he doesn't really seem to be, in doing the normal things that a surfer does, I guess, at that time. And where the heck is everyone else on the beach? So then this happened just before that, and this happened just before that. So he actually bought a shark head. swam around on the beach, made everyone leave because they're scared of the shark, and then enjoyed it all to himself. So, you know, as you get more and more detail about a scene, you might have to undo your belief about what it involves. And again, sometimes events turn out differently than expected. Quick decisions often lead to wrong conclusions. We should consider different interpretations, adjust our beliefs accordingly, and seek as much information as possible. So this type of process leads people to then a new way of thinking, hopefully. So these are quotations from people that have taken metacognitive training and said that it helped them. And so, you know, just because he said something doesn't mean it has to do with me, but it may just more to do with him, the situation, the circumstances. Before, when I observed someone laughing, I used to think he was laughing at me without any evidence. Now I realize I cannot jump to conclusions that the person laughing at me may be laughing for many reasons. So we didn't get to this by talking to that person about that belief. But when they start to learn to question beliefs and realize we all need to undo our beliefs sometimes, they did it themselves and applied that to their own beliefs that people were concerned about. So looking at things from different angles. It's not going to cure a person, but it's a useful wellness tool. This is a study that we did in Germany and published in 2014 in one of the top psychiatry journals, showing that delusions, this is what happens over pre-post 1 month treatment, follow-up 6 months later, and follow-up 3 years later. And 3 years later, there was still a reduction in delusions in metacognitive training relative to a control condition. And there was also, this is positive symptoms, so you know, all types of positive symptoms related to delusions also decreased after even 3 years, and self-esteem increased in the metacognitive training group 3 years later. So unlike with medication, when you stop taking it, you're developing tools with metacognitive training. The same thing with cognitive behavioral therapy, so that when you're out of therapy or out of the training, you can actually use those skills in everyday life. Think about, you know, things in your life that you thought it was one way and then it turned out to be a different way. And we've all experienced that. So it's something you can practice every day. And so I've already mentioned how you can take part in metacognitive training this summer. So I'll have this on the slide at the end again. But this will be facilitated by Kirsten Reed under Desiree Bloom's supervision. And like I already mentioned, just email this address or call this number, and Kirsten will be in touch with you. And so metacognitive training works on thought processes, thinking patterns. And just by that, you know, similarly to memory and attention, it also, you know, ends up affecting brain networks, which in everyday life, someone can work on changing the way they think about the world and not jumping to conclusions, integrating disconfirming evidence, and make that part of the way that they live their life. And so I just want to quickly show you the brain networks that are underlying here. We do a lot of work on brain imaging, but you know, that's more presented to other brain imaging researchers. So I'm not sure how interesting it is to everyone. But anyway, this is the original work we did on integrating disconfirming evidence. So here's a man on one side of the fence with a dog at his feet, and then there's another dog on the other side of the fence, because he just built a fence for his dog, shopping for guard dogs. Has just escaped from a barking dog, or is he playing with his neighbor's barking dog? And most people think he's playing with the neighbor's barking dog and will rate that highly, but the rating for playing with the neighbor's barking dog starts to go down when you see this is what happened before that, and this is what happened before that. So it's not really playing with his dog. It looks more like he's escaping from a barking dog. And so that one goes up with each picture, but this, that we call a lure, the lure looked good here. He's playing with his neighbor's barking dog, but looked less good here. And people with schizophrenia and delusions don't want to downrate the lure. So they don't want to integrate the evidence against the way things seemed at the beginning. And that's what we call a bias against disconfirmatory evidence. We've published at least 10, 12 papers showing that that's consistently correlated with the severity of delusions. And now we know that there's different brain networks involved with this. So there's this brain network that we call the Reevaluating Network. And I don't know how interesting this is, but anyway, this network is less active in people with delusions when they're supposed to be integrating disconfirming evidence. Not about their delusion, not about the thoughts people are concerned about, but about anything. So there's just less activity in this network. And through metacognitive training, possibly through medication, possibly through CBT, we can activate this network so that we will reevaluate and we'll be able to undo our beliefs. And this is another network under other circumstances. There's not an engagement of this network. When people should be paying attention, they've already just thought, oh, I already know that, so they're not anymore. And so this network needs to be activated in order to pay attention, and this network needs to be activated in order to reevaluate and undo the belief. So I'm almost done. I've talked about cognitive behavior therapy, and I've talked about cognitive rehabilitation, metacognitive training, how they impact thought processes, and cognitive rehabilitation impacts thought processes. And then by just doing that, they also start to change these brain networks, make them more efficient in the case of memory and attention, or allowing more activation in networks that will allow people to pay attention, integrate, disconfirm your evidence, change beliefs. And that's sort of the reevaluation aspect. But now that we know what these brain networks are, we can actually start to look at neuromodulation. And so neuromodulation is a process. Now the person here wearing this cap, there's 256 spots on this cap where electrical activity can be recorded, or a very small electrical activity can be induced. The electricity can be reversed so that there can be small, very small, almost imperceptible pulses of electricity put onto the scalp. And that electricity can pass through the scalp and cause the likelihood of the neurons firing to be more or less. So this is a completely new and unknown type of area of research. But just given the fact that you can stimulate or cause the probability of neurons to change by using electrical activity means that this is something that has to be explored and will inevitably be explored over the next 10, 20, 50 years. And this may turn out to be a revolutionary type of thing. Let's see what else I've got here. Because since we know the patterns, so for example, you might be able to target this network, and targeting that network and increasing activity in this particular network may make people more likely to be willing to integrate disconfirming evidence. So it may be that you can actually prime people in order to go into therapy or go take medication or go into metacognitive training, and they might actually get more out of the training. That might be a faster process. Maybe not on its own, but it may be possible to do this. So at this point, we're just completely exploring, but it's something that's worth exploring because obviously we don't have sufficient treatment for mental illness as much as we would like to have. So this will be explored, and that we may be able to bias the brain to a healthier state using these external electrical or magnetic impulses with the goal of enhancing existing treatments. And so far there's kind of been one electrode pad, and that hasn't been very good because one pad is obviously, the brain doesn't work that way. It works in networks, and it kind of causes a great big electrical change over a large area, not as good. Then they went to 5 electrodes, which is better because you could target better. But now we have 256, and we have 2 of them here in Vancouver. There's only 3 in Canada, and in the world there's probably only a dozen of them. And so it's completely unknown yet, but we are doing our best to try to move forward and see what we can do with this equipment. So that's about all I have to say. Again, there's Kirsten's information if you'd like to take part in metacognitive training. Stefan Moritz and Mahesh Menon, like I already mentioned, were instrumental in getting all this work done, and I mean all of it. Mahesh is also an expert in cognitive behavior therapy, and he works at UBC at the BC Psychosis ward. And there's the people in the lab that have contributed to this work. So I guess that's the end, and there will be time now for questions.
Great, thank you, Todd. So we have had a number of questions that have come through, and we'll try to group them. So we'll start with the metacognitive training. So the first one is metacognitive training possible with Anastognosia?
Well, Anastognosia is a very medical / fancy word for not knowing your own symptoms. So delusions by definition are not knowing your own symptoms. Because if you had insight about the falsity of your delusions, and if I'm off track and that's not what the person was talking about, he or she can let me know. But the whole purpose of metacognitive training is to gain insight into the falseness of delusion. So Anastognosia is a word that means I don't know my own illness. Delusions are the definition of that. And so what we're trying to do is get people to realize that they can know their own, that was a false belief. And so the whole purpose of metacognitive training is to address Anastognosia.
Okay, great. And so there's two questions that are kind of linked here. How can I have someone referred to metacognitive training at UBC? And what level of training does someone need to offer MCT?
Well, MCT can be offered by pretty much, well, the thing is you have to understand something about psychology research in order to, effectively carry out metacognitive training. And so anyone with a, even an undergraduate level in psychology would be able to do it with training. And, a master's level person in psychology would certainly be able to do that. But the more the person learns about the research and the all the findings that have gone into producing metacognitive training, the more effective they'll be.
Great, thank you. And would metacognitive training allow a person to come off medication safely?
Well, we never recommend people going off medication unless their psychiatrist suggests it. And metacognitive training, well, I mean, medication, if you think about what medication really, addresses, it's not addressing a specific delusion. It's making people better from a change in brain chemistry, right? So it's a different approach than cognitive behavioral therapy or metacognitive training. So you kind of need the medication usually in order to have those chemical changes that get you off to a good start. But those chemical changes are not going to directly dive into a belief process, because you need a person to talk about that belief process or that thought process in order to give a person experienced delusions the tools to gain insight into their own illness. So I wouldn't say it's not a replacement, but it complements medication.
Okay, thanks, Todd. And a general psychosis, we've got a couple of questions on that. So why does a delay in treatment for psychosis result in poorer recovery?
Yeah, I mean, that question is a tough one, and it's really difficult to say. And in fact, when you sort of look at the literature, it's not 100%, sure that that's the case. But I don't think I have a good answer for that.
Okay, well, there's another one that's linked. So why is processing speed impacted? And is it because of brain activity, auditory or sensory hallucinations, or are there other reasons?
No, it's not because of sensory, it's not because of hallucinations, or I'm not sure what the other one was, but like I said before, right at the beginning, there's two paths. One of the paths has to do with delusions and hallucinations. The other path has to do with cognitive impairment. So the reason that processing speed is reduced has to do with efficiency of brain networks that are involved in attention. And so when there's a reduced efficiency like that, there's a reduced information processing. And so this type of information processing is checking there, checking that, checking this, checking that, and sort of looking around using visual search, and also keeping information in mind. And if your brain is working less efficiently, then that's just slower. And so that's kind of what that showed. And so cognitive remediation works by making those brain networks more efficient, which allows you to perform better in daily life and also in these neuropsych tests that measure processing speed.
Great. And so cognitive remediation, you may have answered this already. Can cognitive remediation replace medication?
Well, actually, medication doesn't really affect cognitive abilities. Medication is more effective for symptoms like hallucinations and delusions, but it doesn't really affect cognitive remediation. So cognitive remediation affects attention and executive functions and memory, but medications don't really seem to affect those abilities. So cognitive remediation wouldn't even be in the same path as medication.
Okay, great. And how often would one repeat the cognitive remediation, and where could one access, I think you've spoken about that, CR outside of the lower mainland? I don't know if you mentioned that.
Well, I'm not sure where you have to talk to who's ever responsible for the care of the person that is asking, or that is concerned about, the person asking concerned about. I mean, even outside, even in the lower mainland, it's not that easy to get cognitive remediation. And I'm not really sure. Things have changed now with Zoom and online. I'm not sure how that's all working. So, and Mahesh Menon is, he's not here tonight. He was trying to be here, but he's an expert in cognitive remediation. And there's a lot of good experts around that might be able to tell you where you can get cognitive remediation. In fact, someone here, if you know, just go ahead and chime in, because as far as I know, it's not that easy.
You can message me and ask me to unmute you if you would like to. Okay, and then so some links to your research and a bit of a link to medication, some questions on that. How does your work in your field support the efficiency of medication in relation to actual brain health and cognitive competence?
Efficiency of medication. So that sort of tie in with all of the work that I presented, and efficiency of medication has to do with a future role of cognitive, or of neuromodulation. So we know which brain networks involved in efficiency and cognitive performance. We know which brain networks are involved in hallucination. We know which brain networks are involved in delusions. And we know that medication doesn't really impact memory, attention, but it does impact hallucinations, delusions. So if we want to increase the efficiency of medication, and we might be able to use neuromodulation to give medication a head start, so that neuromodulation may be able to target a specific brain network underlying hallucinations, specific brain network underlying delusions, and then to the extent that medication can increase the impact of delusions, having neuromodulation may also impact delusion, or metacognitive training or cognitive behavioral therapy might, also be enhanced by medication, or the effect of the medication could be enhanced by cognitive behavioral therapy or metacognitive training. So it all kind of ties together into one package.
Great, thank you. And another question about your research. So it's quite a long one. Studies show that people with schizophrenia, if treated with the later generation of meds early enough, tend to do better versus those who develop the disease and then receive the more effective meds too late. Regarding the participants, subjects in your program and your research paper, how severe were they? Were they in advanced stages of schizophrenia or early in their diagnosis?
Well, we've probably, published 30 or 40 or even 50 papers on schizophrenia, and those have ranged from people that had to, basically were outpatients who would have contact with mental health teams, and they'd have to find their own way to UBC and things like that, to people that were on, long-term care at Riverview Hospital. So there's not really one answer to that question, but there's just been a whole range of different people that have taken part in the research.
Okay, great, thanks. And did you know progesterone, naturally occurring in the body, treats psychosis?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Okay, so I've got a few more that have just come in. How does schizoaffective disorder fit into this paradigm, i.e. the role of emotions, hypomania, depression?
Well, usually, like almost every study that we do, it relates mostly, the studies on delusions anyway, usually have people with schizoaffective and schizophrenia in the group. And so we don't really usually have enough subjects to make a clear distinction between people that are schizoaffective with delusions and people that are, have a diagnosis of schizophrenia with delusions. And so we haven't really, we usually, just call all of the studies on delusions and psychosis. So we haven't been able to distinguish between the different types of delusions, like the types that might be congruent with the mood, or, all the different types, like, grandiose delusions or paranoid delusions, or delusions of grandiosity. We just haven't had enough subjects. And now that the world's a different place and people can share data a lot more easily, maybe we'll be able to, make those finer distinctions. But unfortunately, we usually only have about 60 or at most 100 people in a study. And usually out of those people, there'd be about 20% that have delusions that while they're in the study. So that ends up being sort of like 20 people. And you can't really show, those subtle differences between the types of delusions in that small sample, unfortunately.
Okay, great. And so how can one connect with the intelligent middle-aged person who has lived with schizophrenia for 30 years and has Anastognosia, says health, and who says the health system is harmful and useless?
Well, I mean, this is kind of the major, one of the major motivations of metacognitive training, to create a situation that doesn't really feel medical, but feels more about like discussion, and also is not kind of confrontational, but more fun and games. And, someone that is an intelligent middle-aged person, I mean, we think a lot in the world now about beliefs and how people form them and whether or not they can be revised. And so I think that's sort of a pretty general topic that people have now. So, how to engage somebody? Well, there are online resources too that are related to metacognitive training. There's an app that you can put on your phone that's related to metacognitive training. So the Anastognosia, the unawareness of a person's illness, if you have a strong belief that is false, and you will not see that it's false, the whole purpose of the treatment will be to help you see that you can, not live your life by that, in that reality, right? So that is the purpose of metacognitive training, and it's supposed to, check all those boxes, non-confrontational, sort of about debate and discussion, not about the person's individual symptom, outside of the medical system to a large extent, especially now that we have Zoom sessions. So hopefully it can go a long way towards helping somebody like that.
Great. And can a person who had addiction issues benefit or be involved in this treatment?
Yeah, there's not really a lot of restriction on who can join and who can't join. In general, the only time that it's difficult for someone to take part is when they're, maybe experiencing a lot of thought disorder, so that their sentences just can't come out in a coherent way, or that somebody's very disturbed by strong delusions, and it's just it's all about just being in a group and being able to function in that group without being too disruptive. And so addiction issues shouldn't be an issue at all.
Okay, great. And this is a bit of a longer one. Mahesh Menon arranged for over 50 clinicians to be trained in delivering cognitive remediation. This includes therapists in all of BC's health authorities. Clinicians are now trying to get support and funding to implement these programs. Let your service provider know that you are interested in having these services available. So that's from Susan Inman. I don't know.
Susan.
Out of curiosity, what led you to this work?
Well, it was actually when I was in graduate school. It's nothing like a personal story, so it's maybe not as interesting as it should be. But when I was in graduate school, a student asked me to analyze their data, and this was a data set of symptom ratings of a set of people that had schizophrenia. And she said that if you analyze these data, then hallucinations and delusions will correlate together, but not with other symptoms. Thought disorder and inappropriate affects, so laughing when there's no reason, they'll correlate together. And then negative symptoms, so saying little, not a lot of facial expression, and little movement. So reduced movement, reduced facial expressions, and reduced, verbal output. Those will correlate together. And of course, I thought, yeah, sure, because statistics usually don't work the way you want them to. And I did the analysis, perfect, exactly what she said. So that really made me curious about what type of brain networks would be underlying the commonalities between hallucinations and delusions, and the negative symptoms and thought disorders. So that's kind of how I started. But also I proposed work on this to the Norma Calder Foundation, and they were able to come through with funding for me. And so Otto Forgas at the time was the chairman of the Norma Calder Foundation. And I was so happy to get that funding that I just phoned him and I said, I guarantee you I'm going to create a world-class program of research on schizophrenia right here in the Lower Mainland, because I'm so appreciative of this, and laughed a little bit, but I did it. And so that's how it happened.
Great, thank you. And do you have any current information, RE, drug-induced psychosis that may lead to schizophrenia?
Oh, I'm afraid I can't really speak to that. No, I haven't been researching that area. But I will say that drug-induced psychosis, to the extent that it causes delusions and hallucinations, should have the same brain systems involved as psychosis outside of drug-induced psychosis. But this idea or this issue of, drug-induced psychosis leading to permanent psychosis, I'm afraid I'm not really up to date on that literature, so I can't really say.
Okay, no problem. And this is the final one at the moment, unless someone else sends something in. How do you convince a person to be part of this treatment if by definition they do not think that they need to?
Well, the thing is that people do generally recognize, even though they don't understand their own symptoms, in general, people do acknowledge that something's wrong. They sort of acknowledge that, I am in this, they're going to one of the outpatient teams, or they're in a hospital, or they're on seeing a doctor. So they do recognize there's something wrong. And so, and they may know, and they may know that, something has to be done. And the groups are really that much, are fun. And generally it's not really that confrontational situation. And so just by thinking, okay, I do have to improve something, maybe it's attention, maybe it's, learning something about the way people think, then people don't have to be completely aware of their symptoms and recognize that, what we call delusions are actually a problem for them to agree to take part in the treatment. So it's been just, that's the normal situation. And then hopefully by the end of the treatment, or maybe not the end of a month or 2 months, but maybe after their own assessment of their own reality, 6 months, 3 years, 1 year, 2 years later, they might start to gain insight so that they will reduce what's called Anastognosia, or they will increase awareness of their symptoms.
Thank you, Todd. And then actually we did have a question, just can attendees have access to your lecture notes and slides? I mean, we've obviously recorded the session, so
absolutely.
But is that okay with you?
Yeah, I can send them. Lecture notes, ooh, wait a minute, I don't have any. So just the slides.
Slides,
Should be all I can offer.
Okay, great. And I've allowed everyone to unmute themselves. So if anyone had any additional questions for Todd. I
see one that just popped up, so I should mention MCT.
Oh yeah.
I have someone asked, is MCT used in other illnesses? And I've only been involved in, so the whole story is that Stefan came to Vancouver in Stefan Moritz, and Mahesh Menon was also here at that time. And we together developed metacognitive training for psychosis. But since then, Stefan has developed other modules of metacognitive training for OCD, borderline personality, depression. There may be one more, but it's not only psychosis that metacognitive training can help.
Okay, great. And then I think there's another one. Anything you can say about the metacognitive training groups that would help us encourage our loved ones to participate?
Well, I mean, at this point, when metacognitive training is offered on Zoom, and we're not talking about the person's delusions, and it's a fun type of group thing, you don't have to even go anywhere. And I mean, there are websites for metacognitive training, and a person can go ahead and look through it and find out what the material is like. And I mean, this is a pretty low impact intervention in terms of, I mean, the only part that might be uncomfortable is just being in a group and interacting with the group, but even that's over Zoom now. So I'm not sure if that would be the approach that you want to take, but it is very low impact and is non-confrontational, it's fun, and it's a way to get in touch with other people. So I'm not sure if that's a good approach, but that's the approach I would take.
And where can we see other modules on OCD?
I had a slide up. I think it's, can I share the slide again?
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Okay. Little review for everybody. Here. Yeah, sorry, it's right there at the top, www.uke.de/MCT. Or you can just Google Metacognitive Training and Moritz. It's his website.
UKE. I'll put it in the chat just now.
And if you go on the right-hand side, there's a whole list of all the things that are available. And for those of you that might be interested in giving the groups, there's also some training materials that are on that website too.
Thank you, Kirsten, for sharing as well. Kirsten's just shared a link. Okay, yes, everybody, the lecture has been recorded, and so we will be sharing it so you can get a copy of and view, and the lecture, we're also able to share the lecture slides. Okay, so one more question. Do you know the name of the app for MCT?
Hopefully Kirsten's going to find it. It's right at the bottom of the list. I think it's EMCT.
Okay, and then there's another one whilst we're waiting maybe for that is, could high or low levels of testosterone be a cause of psychosis?
That's that question I don't know an answer to.
Okay. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, you can unmute if you're not able to use the chat. The mute and unmute button is in the bottom left-hand corner on most computers and phones. Or you can wave and I'll ask you to unmute. Anne-Marie, would you like to?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, progesterone treats my psychosis, so that's why I'm wondering in men if high or low levels of testosterone could be a cause of psychosis.
I'm afraid I just don't have an answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for asking, Anne-Marie. Anyone else?
There was a question from someone else, Ozma, asked if you can't convince a person to take the training, can a loved one take it to get the gist of it to help them indirectly?
Yep. I would encourage you, anyone can, look, all this material is free. You can download anything you want and use it in a way that you think is effective. In fact, we opened this up about 10 years ago, or maybe about 8 years ago, so that anyone that uses metacognitive training can change the slides any way they want. They don't have to use our slides anymore. It's not something that's a rule. So, you know, that material is all there for anyone to download. We recommend that a trained person with a certain level of education about psychology administers it, but nothing's going to stop any family member from downloading anything they want from there. It's all just available.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? No? Okay. Wonderful. We will download. How do we download? I'm not sure.
I think they're talking about the lecture notes and the recording.
Yeah, we will share that with everyone after the lecture, as we have all your details, and we'll also include a survey for you to fill out if you don't mind giving us some feedback and letting us know how you found the session. So if there's no more questions, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us. We've had a wonderful turnout this evening, and if you're interested in getting involved with Pathways, please reach out. There'll be a link in the email as well for volunteering opportunities and different ways you might like to get involved. we have just finished our family to family course. So the next course will be in the fall, but we do have lots of workshops and different lectures coming up. The next one is on the 12th of June. We have a workshop that's pretty new for us and expanding our family to family programs. So the idea being that they're a small snapshot of information for it's a 2-hour workshop to help you building skills. So we have a number of those across the summer and going into in the fall as well. So if you're interested, please sign up to the newsletter. And I think Amy's just shared it there. You can also, oh Amy, I think you've just shared that with me directly rather than everyone. There's a few links to make a donation and also to subscribe to our newsletter. So are there no more questions? Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for attending. And thank you so much, Todd. We really appreciate your time this evening.
Absolute pleasure. Nice to
really
see
well
some
received.
familiar faces too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.